This is a chapter I have been waiting on. This is chapter 20 of Dolor and Shadow by Angela B. Chrysler. I am the author and publisher. I have rights to do this. I love this part. From the northernmost ends of the world, over the snows of Jotunheim, down past the fjords of Midgard, the land of Alfheim lay. Her tall ancient pines stretched across the grass plains riddled with rivers that intertwined through forests and lakes. Rich forests radiated the heart of Frey's land, where secrets were buried within, secrets forgotten even by the Leosifar, who had dwelt in the land since it had formed. To the east, Lake Vanyan stretched on like the sea. During the long, cold winters it iced over so thick, so solid that kings fought their wars on the surface, which was strong enough to sustain thousands. When standing on the bank looking out to the farthest corner, one could not see its end. Its primary inlet, the Leosifar city. Its primary inlet, the Kallan River, flowed from the north and split in two around the island filled with the Leosifar city, Gunir, before pouring into Lake Vanyan. At the southernmost end of the lake, the waters drained into the Gotthilf River. For days it flowed, ending the sea at the Kattegat. There the shallow waters clawed and chewed apart a ship's hull, ready to eat away the keel of a negligent crew. Sailors, ignorant of the passing tides, would find themselves run aground, or worse. From the Kattegat, the mountains emerged, reaching high into the heavens, where the peaks rose and vanished into the lowest clouds. Waterfalls cascaded from the mountains, dressing the rock in glistening streaks, the Daugavas' most beloved waterfall being Leafspawn, that supplied Lorlenalin with fresh water. There the Daugava built their mountain city, Lorlenalin, the White Opal. With stones of white glistening in the sun's light, the Daugava city descended from the precipice with a beauty equaled only to that of the Dvagar, who lived in the caves beneath the mountains to the west. Homes and towers dressed the cliff face, overlooking the Kattegat. Winding streets of white led deep into the earth, faceted with towering parapets and balustrades that extended into the clouds. At the base of Lorlenalin and Leafspan's End, the mountain met the sea. There the Daugava shipyard spanned the docks. There they constructed great long ships, shaped to cut through the waters. They formed their hulls to move with the sea, welcoming its power and using it rather than carving an unnatural path against the currents. From the docks the forests began and peppered the crag with speckled green, stretching up and around the elevation where it joined with Alfheim's wood and concealed Lorlenalin. Pines and maps, still green with color, lined the earth and twisted their way up to the main gates in the back of the mountain. Before the sun had reached its height, Kallan's army emerged from the forest. In and out of trees they weaved, crossing the occasional pool of light that spilled across the forest floor. The thunderous rumble of a horn shook the ground in welcome. Kallan slouched back into her saddle, raising a blank set of eyes to the city. As a child, Lorlenalin had been her playground, bursting with many mysteries she once explored. The older she grew, the more restrictions forced her into the confines of her station. No longer free to run through the streets or crawl into hidden corners of the market, the pearl-white streets with green decor were forgotten, left there as a painful reminder of the life she no longer had. The portcullis rose, and the bridge lowered like a giant, outstretched hand, eager to receive her people. Hallowed and cold, Kallan gazed at the courtyard's facade, as she followed her guard to the vast courtyard spanning a generous acre. The city buzzed with excitement around a resplendent fountain of pale green stone that rose at the yard's center, precious gems glistening from every corner of the citadel, adding an ancient grace that permeated the ample streets. Cheers echoed through the high buildings as the warmen dismounted, hungrily taking up their wives or the random wench who ran to greet them. Unseen from the dank side streets, hidden among the barrels and shadows, a lone urchin searched the mounted riders. Careful to keep his distance, Latha grinned from the alley, eager to catch a glimpse of the queen before vanishing into the alley back toward the warrens. Disconnected from the uproar of welcome, Kallan sat, allowing the emptiness to engulf her. She took a moment to watch the children run to their fathers, while a few of her men raised a flagon of mead to hail her name. Kallan lifted her eyes to the citadel, whose white opal face vanished into the clouds. 3 stories above, a vacant balcony, ordained with green stone, extended over the courtyard. By nightfall, she would receive her people from that balcony, and the king's execution would launch the 3-day festivities. Already her people had prepared an altar for the blood eagle. By nightfall, Kallan thought. Nausea set in. and Kallan lowered her eyes as she steered Astrid through the tumult of jubilation, leaving her war men to their glory and song. The corridor filtered the excitement that rolled from the courtyard, easing Kallan's nerve as the light of the late morning faded. An occasional lantern threw a tinge of orange to the stone, lighting her path. Within the labyrinth, she slid from the saddle and gathered the reins, leading Astrid down the hall, past the double white arch that opened to the great hall. Knowing each crack and each crevice of stone, Kallan walked down the hall. A black void encompassed her thoughts as she strode past the barracks, where a handful of men had escaped the courtyard ruckus. Astrid's hooves struck the stone with a deafening clop that set the rhythm of her pace. The horse shook his head and snorted, pulling the reins in Kallan's grip. At the end of the corridor, a warm orange light poured from the stables, where the walls opened to a vast cave that the waters of Livson had honed naturally into the mountain. The thundering falls welcomed her and drowned out all outside noise, as the water sent a constant hum into the grotto that calmed the fjord horses. A permanent gust of air pushed through the subterranean room and mingled with the scent of sweet hay. Mindlessly, Kallan stepped over the small manufactured stream directed off the main river outside the grotto. Its waters provided the stables with a constant supply of fresh, running water made available for watering the animals and cleaning. Fresh hay covered the floor alongside the stalls built of thick, rich wood. Blankets, bridles, and saddles hung about the cavern on pegs, fences, and barrels. The wrought iron lanterns scattered about gave sufficient light, save for a single path buried in darkness at the back of the stables near Lifsven. To the naked eye, the path appeared to fade behind the walls, but in actuality it emerged on the outside, leading into a series of coarser paths and trails. Kallan led Astrid down the lines of stalls, where more than 36 fjord horses grazed. Their wide, stocky bodies appeared dwarfed next to Astrid's tall, muscular build of the southeastern deserts. His dark coat and long black mane contrasted the rows of light cream coats with black and white tails. Paying the stable master and stablemen no mind, Kallan directed Astrid into his stall, where she loosened the buckle on her saddle. A shipment of silk and alum just arrived in exchange for our soapstone, whetstone, and iron. The gentle voice glazed over her light silk, and Kallan whipped her attention around to the well-groomed, wiry frame of her scribe, Eilif. He peered through the thin, pale brown hair that tapered to his shoulder. "Eilif," she said, and with no qualms leapt into his skinny arms, forcing him to catch her and knowing he would. With a chuckle he hugged Kallan, holding on a bit longer than was customary before letting go again. "What news did you bring from the valley?" Eilif's thin grin increased the corner of his eyes, matching the lines of the corner of his mouth. Kallan furrowed her brow and grinned, still holding on to his arm. "My scout rode ahead. You know we bring the king." Eilif shrugged. "Rumors hardly reflect the truth. Did he say anything?" he asked, pushing the subject too often breached by Gudrun. "Never mind that," Kallan said. "How are Rind and Latha and Cree? How is she?" "As well as always," Eilif said. "An excellent evasion. What did he say?" Kallan's face fell, and she diverted her attention to Astrid, emptying her thoughts for physical work. She pulled the saddle from Astrid's back and disposed of it on the stone fence that made up Astrid's stall. Eilif whisked around the horse and, intercepting her, took her hands. "What did he say?" Eilif asked. Kallan did her best to look confused. "He? The king," Eilif said, playing along. "Oh." Kallan's face fell, and she took back her hands to pull off the bearskin from Astrid's back. "We haven't spoken yet," she said, heaving the load out to the fence. Eilif blinked back, surprised. "You mean to say that you finally have the king of Gunir shackled in chains, and you haven't spoken yet?" Kallan pushed a brush through Astrid's coat. She managed to get in 2 vigorous strokes before Eilif took the brush from her. She surrendered to his interference, knowing that a fight would be futile. "My dearest lady," he said, placing the brush on the barrel behind her and touching her chin, raising her face to his. Her eyes brimmed with a constant sorrow none could take from her. Eilif shook his head and forced a sadness smile. "Will you never laugh again?" Kallan said nothing as she studied the face of her friend, unmarked from battle scars. After a moment her brow furrowed with questions. "Something is different about you," he said. With a jerk, Kallan freed her chin and took up a bucket of oats she held for Astrid. If he looked at her long enough, he would reach the same conclusion that Gudrun had, that she had met someone. "What will you do now that King Rune is here?" Eilif asked. "My dearest Eilif," Kallan grinned, "you always did know when to back off. I will do with the king as I've always done. The Dark One still lives. Executing the king will be just what I need to get the Dark One's attention." "You're picking a fight," Eilif said. Kallan shrugged. "He picked one first," she said as memories flooded back of a raid gone bad. Outnumbered, she had underestimated the Dark One's prowess and failed. to see him double back with twice the guard. His maneuver had caught her by surprise and left him with a scar that seared into his brow. She'd barely escaped. "I have an unfinished quarrel with that berserker," she said. "One I'd look to end." "You are certain you'll win?" Alef asked. "I must," she said, looking up from the oats. With a nod and shoulders slouched, the scribe started back toward the corridor. "Alef!" Her crystal voice pulled him back, and he stood as she mustered the strength to gather the words while biting the side of her lip. "Tonight, when I receive my people," fine lines creased the corner of Alef's mouth as he grinned. "When you are dressed in primped and are ordained in glistening jewels, and Gudrun has you stuffed into a gown made of the finest eastern silks," he said, quoting a much younger Kallan from ages ago. "Whether I am ready or not, I will be forced to receive the king," Kallan said, setting her worries aside. But it was too late. She knew Alef had seen. Fondly, the scribe took up Kallan's hand. "Lady Kallan," he planted a kiss on her knuckles, "you have always been, and will always be my dearest lady. If you run to the ends of the earth, so it is that I will follow." Without another word, the scribe disappeared into the corridor, leaving her alone with her thoughts turning to the feasts the cooks were preparing. A tremble that began in her arms built to Kallan's shoulders until her entire body felt as if it would crumble. Fighting to breathe, Kallan dropped the bucket of oats, passed Astrid an apple from her pouch, and took up the reins. Without a second glance, she climbed onto Astrid and steered him around, sending him into a canter down the path behind Livsvan as the apple restored the luster to his coat. She had barely ridden the few steps out into the open before coaxing Astrid into a full gallop around the precipice where Livsvan fell.